Hello. Today we're going to talk about the innervation of the lower teeth. The lower teeth, as we all remember from the video about the upper teeth, there are 8 on each side, 2 incisors, a canine at the corner of the mouth, 2 premolars, and then our 3 molars. Obviously, the last molar is called the wisdom tooth, and that's the tooth you get when you're about 17 or 18 years old. The mandible, the bone in which the lower teeth are embedded, is a far more dense piece of bone and has much thicker cortical plate than the maxilla. And this makes a big difference to how we can give local anaesthetic. When we try to give local anaesthetic, if we try to give it adjacent to thick, dense cortical bone, it won't be able to diffuse through the bone and get to the opening of the apex of the teeth to get to the nerves before they get to the pulp. So this would be a waste of time. The important thing to remember is the bone, as you get towards the incisors and canine region, is actually thinner and less dense. And you can see this on yourself. If you run your finger across your lower lip, you can actually feel the roots of your teeth through that thin cortical bone. So the lower front teeth, the placement of local anaesthetic solution adjacent to them can get through this thinner bone and get to that apical foramen and get to the nerves that supply these teeth. So the lower anterior teeth we can treat more like upper teeth, in that if we give solution adjacent to the tooth, it will affect the pulps of that teeth. But on the lingual surface, so this is how we get local anaesthetic solution to the lower anterior teeth, by just placing the solution adjacent to the tooth that we want that solution to affect. And it can get through the bone and affect the apical foramen, the nerves running through the apical foramen of that tooth. However, like I said, the bone is extremely thick around the molars and premolars, and that methodology doesn't work. So then we have to think about where the nerves run. And the nerves that supply the teeth, the nerve runs through the bone, underneath the teeth, to then run into the ramus of the mandible through a canal, to then come out of that canal at that foramen that we've all seen on the ramus of the mandible, on the internal surface of the ramus of the mandible, the mandibular foramen. And this is the first point at which the nerve that is going to supply the pulps of these lower teeth is actually accessible, and where it is not covered in dense bone. So this is where we put solution to then affect that nerve, so it will block the action potentials as they run to any of these teeth around this arch. And this is called an inferior alveolar nerve block. Now, the word block is a very important word. A block is different from an infiltration, which we used down here. A block means that we block action potentials at a point distant from where we want the effect, and it blocks a whole region. Whereas an infiltration means that we put the solution adjacent to where we want the effect. So we've now seen the two methodologies for putting local anaesthetic solution to block action potentials coming from the teeth themselves. However, this hasn't accommodated the issues around the nerve supply for the areas of gingiva and periodontal ligament adjacent to the teeth. For example, if we were going to extract one of these teeth, let's say we were going to extract this lower 6 here, we would not only need to block the action potentials that are coming from the pulp of the tooth, but we are also going to tear the gingiva on the lingual and buccal surfaces and to damage or break the periodontal ligament that is holding this tooth in place. So we need to understand the nerve supplies to these two areas as well. Now the lingual is relatively easy because there's a large nerve that comes down through the floor of the mouth to supply the anterior 2/3 of the tongue and also spreads out to supply the floor of the mouth and the mucosa and periodontal ligament and bone on the lingual surface of the lower teeth. In fact, it covers all the lingual surfaces of all the lower teeth, and this is called the lingual nerve. And we'll talk about where that comes from in a minute. So that lingual nerve supplies all of this gingiva around the lingual surface of all the teeth and the gingiva and the periodontal ligament in this area. On the buccal side, there are two areas of supply. The first is a little branch of this inferior alveolar nerve that comes out through a little foramen just below, somewhere in the region of the 3, 4s and 5s, and it comes out and supplies the chin area. All of this area in here, and it supplies the gingiva and periodontal ligament around the buccal and labial surfaces of the 1, 2, 3, 4, not often the 5. It's a bit variable in that where the foramen comes out. And this is called the mental nerve. The mental nerve is really mental actually means chin. So it's the chin nerve, the mental nerve. And the good news is when you're doing infiltrations in this region to actually affect the pulp of teeth, at the same time, it's a 2-for-1 offer in a sense, at the same time you will be blocking branches of the mental nerve in the area. So for example, let's imagine you are doing deep root planing on the labial of this lower 2. What you would need to do is block these mental nerve fibres, and you could just infiltrate adjacent to the 2 to do that. So these anterior teeth, it's purely infiltrations next to the teeth. And the last nerve in our story we need to cover, this buccal area around the molars and the 5 and possibly the 4. And there's the third nerve, fourth nerve in this sequence of nerves that supplies this region. And we'll just pop him in like this, and he comes around the buccal area just behind the molar teeth. In fact, he runs sort of like that across there and heads up to join its partners, and we'll talk about them in a minute. And this nerve is called the buccal nerve. And it supplies all the buccal, mucosa, gingiva and periodontal ligament around the 8, 7, 6 and 5. And our target point for giving local anaesthetic to block the buccal nerve, it's one of the easiest lower injections you need to give, is just behind the last molar tooth, just in that soft tissue behind the last molar tooth, and that is where we can block the buccal nerve. So that's the full story in a pictorial form of the innervations around the lower teeth. Let's just write those out so we get them clear. So, the four nerves that we include in this story are the inferior alveolar nerve, which supplies the pulps of the teeth, teeth 1 to 8, so it supplies all the pulps. The inferior alveolar nerve also has a little branch that comes off it, called the mental nerve, and that supplies the periodontal ligament and the gingiva and the mucosa to the buccal of the 1, 2, 4 region. And then the other nerves in this story, so that's 1, we'll call this 2, even though it's a branch of 1, we probably should call it 1A really, but we'll call it 2. The third nerve in this story was the lingual nerve. And it supplies the PDL, the gingiva, the mucosa, the floor of the mouth, for the tongue side or the lingual side of the 1 to 8. And we didn't talk about in our diagram where we actually block that nerve, so we'll just roll back to the diagram for a minute and have a look at this and work out, for the lingual nerve, where would we give local anaesthetic to block the lingual nerve. Now, there are multiple choices in this story. We could treat it exactly the same as we treat the greater palatine nerve. We could actually put solution a little bit behind the tooth we wanted to work on. So, for example, let's go back to our story of extracting this 6. Theoretically, we could put the solution just a wee bit behind the tooth, in the floor of the mouth, in the mucous membranes in the floor of the mouth, and we would block those fibres supplying that region. However, if we are going to block the inferior alveolar nerve with this inferior alveolar nerve block, the good news is that the lingual and inferior alveolar nerve run very close together up in this last part up here. In fact, they are within 3 or 4 millimetres of each other. So when you do an inferior alveolar nerve block, the solution will also affect the inferior alveolar nerve, but it will also affect the lingual. So the lingual nerve can be blocked just with the one injection in that area there if you're going to give an inferior alveolar nerve block. Otherwise, you can block it by giving a little bit of solution just in the floor of the mouth behind where you're working. So that's the lingual. And the fourth nerve in this sequence is the buccal nerve. And the buccal nerve supplies the gingiva. We'll just make ourselves a little bit more space here, we're running out of space. Gingiva, PDL, mucosa, to the buccal of the 5 to 8 region. So you can now see that we have, with 4 nerves, covered off all the region around the lower mouth, lower jaw. The other important thing to remember is all of these nerves, all 4 of them, come from one original location, and that is the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. So the inferior alveolar nerve, the lingual, and the buccal, plus that little piece that we talked about, the mental, all originate from the mandibular division of trigeminal. And all of this branching happens in a region called the infratemporal fossa. That's an O, by the way, fossa. And the infratemporal fossa is a quite important piece of anatomy that we'll talk about separately in another video. Thank you.